We are going to go ahead and take a look at the brain and cranial nerves in this 3D anatomy app. We'll kind of be learning together because I've never used this app for the brain or for the cranial nerves. I get the impression that from looking at this picture, it includes every little nerve as it should, but I don't see easy ways to select out the ones I'm looking for, so we'll kind of be digging together. But as far as the brain goes, it should be pretty darn useful. So let's see. Oh, good, they even segment these out. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the 5 lobes first, and then we use something called the medical scheme for naming lobes. There are other ways for naming the surface features of the brain. We use the medical scheme. So anyway, here's the frontal lobe. Very large lobe. It actually includes this structure here as well. They've just separated it out because this is a structure we will reference. So it's really, if to draw it, it'd really be all of this here. So on a quiz or something, nothing will be selected in green. So I may simply just do a, oops, sorry, my phone rang. I may simply just do an X and say identify this lobe or something along those lines. Okay, so behind the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe also includes this structure here. Again, they just separated it out. So if I were going to outline the parietal lobe, I would outline it like that. So that is the parietal lobe. Behind the parietal lobe is the occipital lobe. And then here we have the temporal lobe. Okay, pretty easy. Now we can actually hide. Ooh, I was hoping it was going to hide just the lobe. It hid everything. Okay, so we still can't see the insula, unfortunately. So I won't be able to quiz you on the insula. That's okay. Oops. So let's go ahead and keep looking at the gyri and sulci. I have to remove the dura mater here. All right, so we have a precentral sulcus and a postcentral sulcus. And here they are, I'm sorry, I said sulcus. Precentral gyrus and postcentral gyrus. They're separated by a structure called the central sulcus, which is the sulcus in between the two. So on a quiz, if I were to say, identify this structure, your biggest clue is where is this gyrus in relation to the central sulcus. So if it's behind the central sulcus, it is called the postcentral gyrus, and if it's in front of the central sulcus, it's called the precentral gyrus. The postcentral gyrus is a part of the parietal lobe. The precentral gyrus is a part of the frontal lobe. Okay, and they actually allow you to click on the central sulcus here. I typically say a way to identify the central sulcus is that it goes all the way from what's called the median longitudinal fissure to the lateral fissure or lateral sulcus. This particular app really has 2 that do that. I typically don't see that on real brains or models, so you guys are just going to have to remember the approximate location and the fact that the central sulcus is in between these 2 gyri that extend all the way from the top to the lateral sulcus. So these 2 gyri, the postcentral and the precentral, are the only gyri that go from the median longitudinal fissure all the way down to the lateral sulcus. You can see the rest are all broken up, horizontal. They don't have this appearance. Okay, so precentral gyrus, central sulcus, postcentral gyrus. We're going to talk all about what these do functionally in lecture. I think it's pretty interesting. Let's see if we can get a view of, yeah, it looks like we can, a sagittal view. We have to remove some ventricles and basal ganglia and things. Okay. Oh, that's cool. They break the thalamus into nuclei. That's pretty interesting. It makes it harder to remove them, though. Okay, I guess that's good enough. So this here is the cingulate gyrus. And then what I'm coloring in green here, I wonder if it will allow me to click on it. No, okay. The sulcus outlining the cingulate gyrus is called the cingulate sulcus. Okay. So cingulate gyrus, cingulate sulcus. This structure here, I'm kind of going out of order of the notes, but right here is called the corpus callosum. The cingulate gyrus kind of wraps around the corpus callosum. And that is really it for the gyri and sulci that we cover in this class. There are more, of course, but for our class, I believe that's about it. So we talked about the central sulcus, the central sulcus, the lateral sulcus, and then the cingulate sulcus. And then we talked about the precentral gyrus, postcentral gyrus, and cingulate gyrus. So that's it for gyri and sulci. Now let's move on to the diencephalon and brainstem. So when you see the word diencephalon, you are thinking thalamus. Because there are 3 components to the diencephalon and they all have the word thalamus in it. And this particular model's gone above and beyond with the thalamus. It has the various nuclei of the thalamus. You don't need to know those for our class, but they're all here. So these nuclei collectively are called the thalamus. And there's an adhesion between the 2 lobes of the thalamus, or the 2 hemispheres of the thalamus. I wonder if there's an easy way to... Oh, look at that. That's cool. This is a pretty nice app. If we remove this, I wonder if we'll be able to see the interthalamic. Yes, right there. Interthalamic adhesion. They're calling it the internal medullary lamina of the thalamus. That is fine as well. But interthalamic adhesion that holds the 2 hemispheres of the thalamus together. It's a commissure, really, that connects the 2 thalamic hemispheres. So this all collectively is the thalamus. So if you saw an X on this structure, what is this structure? Thalamus. The hypothalamus is, well, you can see it here. There's two lobes or 2 halves, and it's just sort of anterior and inferior to the thalamus. The hypo comes from the fact that it's slightly inferior, and the pituitary gland connects to it. Oh, and this is cool. You can see the infundibulum. This, if you guys have ever heard of diabetes insipidus, oh, I'm sorry, I have a quick story to tell. So I went to Puerto Rico for a few months with a buddy of mine for a clinical rotation, and oh man, he was such a jerk. He convinced me to go. He's Puerto Rican and he has family there and stuff, so he convinced me to go with him for this rotation in a hospital down there. And he was like, "Don't worry about it. Everybody speaks English there. It's no problem." And he's like, "I don't speak Spanish." He kind of did, but he's like, we're in the same boat, so if I'm comfortable going, you should be too. So we get there and we get to the hospital, and of course nobody speaks, I shouldn't say nobody speaks English, but nobody wants to speak English because just like, you or I, if our only language is English, would prefer not to speak Spanish, they all prefer not to speak English there. So I was kind of a nuisance to everybody, to the patients and to my coworkers. And of course, as soon as my friend got there, he all of a sudden spoke Spanish perfectly. So He just didn't want to go by himself. But basically, there was a seasoning they put on everything called sazon, something like that, Sauzon. And it was so good. It made everything so savory, and it made everything kind of orange. Anyway, I found it at a Stater Brothers here. They actually sold it. I'm like, man, I need to bring this stuff home. It's so good. I was used to it being on everything. And I looked at the ingredients, and there was only one ingredient, and it was monosodium glutamate. I'm like, monosodium glutamate. Monosodium. I'm like, oh, that's MSG. So the only ingredient in Sazone was MSG. It might have been like monosodium glutamate and salt, but it was basically just MSG. So I was putting MSG on all my food, and it tasted amazing. But one of the reasons why you're not supposed to eat MSG is because it can sever this connection between your pituitary gland and your hypothalamus. And one of the hormones your pituitary gland releases is called antidiuretic hormone. So it allows you to hold, or it limits how much urine you produce so that you're not constantly needing to urinate. Anyway, so that particular disorder is called diabetes insipidus, or type 3 diabetes. It's not very common, but it happens when that is severed. Wow, what a tangent. In lecture, if you had an in-person lecture with me, you would see that these tangents are commonplace. It's easier to avoid when I'm recording, but this one got through. I'm sorry. So anyway, thalamus, hypothalamus, interthalamic adhesion, and here's actually the epithalamus, although it's not on your notes. That is the epithalamus, the third component of the diencephalon. Okay, let's look at the brainstem. Brainstem is comprised of the midbrain, pons, and medulla. And you can see them all pretty well here, it looks like. So here's the midbrain. See, that is a cerebral peduncle. It's a part of the midbrain. Wonder if there's a way that we can select the midbrain. Here's a corpora quadrigemma, which is a part of the midbrain. So you have two pairs of colliculi. It's not allowing me to select the midbrain. So what we will do is, if you see something, there we go. If you see this tagged, so it's something that's clearly below the diencephalon, below the thalamus, but above pons, which is what we're about to learn in a second, that is the midbrain of the brainstem. This here is pons, which sits below the midbrain. It's pretty unique looking. It's tough to miss. And then below the pons, you have the medulla oblongata, which also includes these pyramids and olives and stuff too. But so for probably what I would do, I'd probably do this to make it very convenient for you guys. I'd probably segment all three. Okay. So I'd say, what's that? And you'd say pons. What's this? You'd say midbrain. What's this? You'd say medulla oblongata. Below the medulla oblongata, so this point down, that's when your spinal cord starts. So these three structures here collectively are referred to as your brainstem. And then this structure here, including the hypothalamus, epithalamus, and thalamus, is called the diencephalon. And then behind the pons, you have the cerebellum, and they've broken it into different lobes and things. But this whole structure here is called the cerebellum. Okay, pretty easy lab so far, I hope. This will be one of the simpler labs this quarter, so if it's not exciting enough for you, don't be dismayed. The brachial plexus is a lot of fun, and the arteries are a lot of fun. So now here's going to be the potentially tricky part, because we have so many nerves here. It's going to be fun identifying the cranial nerves, but we can do it. Oh, and we have ganglia. Oh, look at this. This is going to be the trigeminal ganglion. How cool is that? But okay, I digress. So this is actually pretty cool. I mean, you can't see this in the cadaver or in the real brains in lab. This stuff, the nerves sort of dry up quickly and become frayed and frail, and many of them are missing. And so this is, even though this isn't real, it's still pretty neat. So let's go through and name the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So the first one, the olfactory nerve, is very unique. I wonder if you guys have noticed it yet. So if you guys remember the cribriform plate, the cribriform plates were right here, and there was a cristagalli little shark fin dividing the two cribriform plates. Look at the nerve tissue that hangs down through the holes in the cribriform plate. How cool is that? So these are actual individual olfactory nerve axons hanging through the cribriform plate, coming out of the two olfactory bulbs. The actual nerve itself right here is called the olfactory nerve or olfactory tract. So that would be cranial nerve 1. Okay, cranial nerve 1. How cool is that? Okay. Anyway, cranial nerve 1. Right near it is cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve. And you have some hints here because you can see it going to the eyes. Also, this structure right here is called the optic chiasm. Right there. Let me try to get it better. There we go. And that's where the two optic nerves meet. And it's right near the hypothalamus. Anyway, that's called the optic chiasm. So between seeing the nerves from the retina in your eye and that are in the shape of an eye and the optic chiasm, you can be pretty confident that this is the optic nerve, cranial nerve 2. Okay, from here it is going to get more difficult. So we're going to zoom in a little bit because the oculomotor nerve comes out right above pons, right near the cerebral peduncles. I'm guessing this is it. Yes, good thing. So there is the oculomotor nerve. You can see the right and the left. So these are, remember, the cerebral peduncles. We didn't really talk about them, but because they comprise a big portion of the midbrain, which we did talk about. And then coming out of the middle of those peduncles, right above pons, is oculomotor nerve, which is cranial nerve 3. Okay. Now the trochlear nerve is unique because it comes from behind the midbrain. So you can see that nerve coming from back behind the midbrain. It's unique in that way. So hopefully that uniqueness is enough to help you identify it. So let's just do a quick recap from this view right here. So we have cranial nerve 1, olfactory nerve, cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve, cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, and pretty close to that, except it's coming from behind the midbrain instead of the front, we have the trochlear nerve. And you can see the full track here, which is cool. You can't ever see this on a real brain, so I'll see if I can outline it. So it starts back here, and then it goes all the way to some of the muscles that move your eyeball. And it keeps going, but I kind of lose track of it there. So anyway, that's the trochlear nerve. Then you have the trigeminal nerve, which is very easy to identify. It's usually cut at the base here, so it looks like a little horn coming out of the pons. In this case, we can actually see it going into the trigeminal ganglion and the 3 branches of that ganglion that go out and innervate muscles of the face and mouth and provide sensation to the face. So that's trigeminal nerve. That's cranial nerve 5. Now for cranial nerve 6, which is abducens, we have to kind of, let me see if I can remove. Oh yeah, that's great. Okay, so we look midline here on the medulla oblongata, and we see a pair of nerves right here. Those are the left and right abducens nerves, or cranial nerve 6. For the quizzes and tests, I want you to write out the name, abducens nerve. You don't have to do the name and number, just the name. So that's abducens nerve. Then we move laterally from there, and we should find, with any luck, oh boy, this is exciting. We're on a bit of a hunt here. you should find two nerves a little bit more laterally. Okay. Oh no, that's glossopharyngeal. I'm looking for facial. Oh wow, look at that. Okay. So here is facial nerve. So they have it coming like as a bundle. And that's honestly, I don't feel that that's wrong, because in my experience looking at actual brains, it just kind of looks like a kind of a frayed mess here, just over the medulla, just over the olives in the medulla. But typically on diagrams, it's drawn a little bit different than this, but that's okay. I like how close to reality this is, even though it is kind of confusing. So cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. So the most lateral of this group of nerves is the facial nerve. And then, I'm sorry, I said most lateral. Most medial of this group of nerves is the facial nerve. Lateral to the facial nerve, the most lateral nerve here, and actually it looks like it's leaving us two separate fascicles of axons, so it's kind of two separate nerves, is a vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay, so facial and vestibulocochlear nerve. So just a real quick recap, we had abducens, which was 6, and then facial, which was 7, and vestibulocochlear, which was 8. And then we have glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve 9. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. This is pretty cool. You can see the course it takes all the way down to below the first vertebrae. So look at that. So there it is. Let me see if I can draw it. So being that it's a pharyngeal nerve, that makes sense because it's going down into this area of your pharynx down here. Oops, did I just hide it? Yes, I did. So it goes all the way out to here, to your hyoid bone. Very, very cool that we can see that. I've never seen it in that way before using real brains. So anyway, glossopharyngeal, so that is cranial nerve 9. And then we have vagus, the vagus nerve, which is quite the nerve. But if we zoom out, we can see how extensive it is. So here it is. Oops, I lost it. Going way down into your thoracic cavity and eventually your abdominal cavity, coming from your brainstem. How crazy is that? So that's where it becomes the vagal trunk, I guess. So we lose it right about here, in the mid-thoracic level. Anyway, I won't ever click on it there for you. I'll click on it where it exits the brainstem. And it does so right there, right below glossopharyngeal, the vagus nerve. Let me just make sure you guys can see that. This nerve right there. Okay, that is the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10. And then somewhere around here we should see the spinal accessory. I'm guessing, yes, they're calling it the accessory nerve, and that's how our notes have it labeled as well. I'm just used to it being called spinal accessory nerve. That's cranial nerve 11, the spinal nerve. I just don't like calling it the spinal nerve because we have, lots of spinal nerves that come out of our spinal cord, so it's confusing. But anyway, that's what it's called, spinal nerve, cranial nerve 11. And I suspect we'll see it disappear somewhere kind of in the upper trapezius region. Yep, there it is. And there it is, so it's giving some innervation to your trapezius muscle. That is one of the nerves that innervates your trapezius. So if you shrug your shoulders, it's actually a cranial nerve that's accomplishing that for you. It's innervating your trapezius. So that's cranial nerve 11. So our last one is hypoglossal, which is right there, hypoglossal nerve. And that will probably disappear somewhere in your mouth because it innervates your tongue. So let's follow it. Yep, there it is. Oh, the thing's covering it up. Hypoglossal nerve ends right here where we would expect our tongue to be. So those are the 12 cranial nerves. It looks a little, I'm not going to lie to you. You wouldn't believe me if I did. It looks a little bananas when you look at it like this. So the key is to just start with things you know and work downward. So it's very easy to identify the olfactory nerve. Look at it. It has this crazy, these olfactory bulbs with axons hanging through the cribriform plate. It's very easy. Then you can find the optic nerve right next to it. Also pretty easy. You can confirm with all the nerve tissue in your retina. You can confirm that they're coming out of the optic chiasm. From there, just use the photo in your notes and remember that, okay, I need to find oculomotor next. It comes out in between pons and the midbrain, kind of medially. There it is, oculomotor. There's trochlear right next to it. I hope you guys can see the slight color change that happens when I click on something. I don't know. My screen's pretty big, so I might be able to see it better than you guys can. So anyway, this is 3. This is 4. 4 being trochlear. 5 is very easy to identify, trigeminal, coming out of the lateral aspect of pons. And then it gets tough again at 6. So once you find number 1, it's easy to find 1 through 5. Then you need to kind of reset and find cranial nerve number 6. And remember, on a quiz, one of these is going to be highlighted. So it's not like you just see this picture and have to name everything. You're just going to have to name one thing. So for example, if this is highlighted, okay, and I say, hey, what's that nerve? Well, you're saying, okay, it's coming out below pons, very medially, almost midline on the medulla oblongata. That's abducens. That's how you have to study it, really. And then you say, okay, now we're over here. I remember this kind of confusing thing. So the more medial one was facial, the more lateral one was vestibulocochlear, and this one that went straight down towards the pharynx was glossopharyngeal. So if you see this highlighted, it's facial. If you see that highlighted, it's vestibulocochlear, and if you see that highlighted, it's glossopharyngeal. Spinal is kind of unique looking. So here it is, spinal accessory. And then hypoglossal is very unique looking. Coming out between the olives of the medulla oblongata. These things right here are called olives, because they have the olivary nucleus and then the pyramid. So olives and pyramids, you don't need to know that, but the hypoglossal nerve comes out between the olives and the pyramids of the medulla oblongata. So anyway, I know that's a bit confusing. We may do, this might be one that's worth doing a live Zoom on. You guys can just give me feedback and a Canvas message if you want a review of this. That's fine, especially like before the midterm or something. If you would like to have a list of things you'd like to go over in real time, I would like to do that. I'm going to do it for sure at least once, but if you want to do it more than once, let me know. Anyway, that is it for the cranial nerves. So cranial nerves 1 through 12, and then we also covered some brain structures. That concludes our first lab, you guys. It's a short lab, but I think with the cranial nerves, it still merits a little bit of study for your quiz next week, which will be a week from today, next Monday. And it will be on anponline.com. You'll see plenty of announcements on Canvas, don't worry. So in the meantime, just watch this a few times. Feel free. I don't think it was very expensive. I think it was under $10 for this app if you'd like to buy the app to study. You also have the coloring guide to practice with. So I think this is a slow but good start to the quarter. Please feel free to give me any feedback or ask me any questions. Talk to you guys soon.